Happy December.
Yes.
Glad we just got someone joining us, so we know we're live.
Okay.
And welcome to Quilts First.
We have a lot to talk about, kind of a year-end wrap-up
And
tonight.
a matchmaker wrap-up.
Exactly.
So just as a quick heads up, there is
Spoiler.
a spoiler alert because we will be talking about the Matchmaker
Yeah.
Quiltalong in addition to lots of other things.
So hello Jody. Okay, so we've got the first comments, so we know everybody's getting the stream here. So we had some questions on in our Facebook group, and so I'm going to just start with questions. And as more people join us, we'll talk about the Matchmaker quilt. So the first question was, who designs our quilts?
Oh.
We do, both of us together.
We do, and not only together, but it is such a back and forth that I'd say like half a year after we've designed a quilt, we often forget how it transformed going
Right.
through the two of us.
Started.
I mean, every quilt, there's going to be the seed of an idea that comes from one or the other, obviously.
Yeah.
But very often, the final product looks nothing like the original sketch. And we're actually going to walk you through the development process later on of our Matchmaker quilt, just to kind of deal with that issue. As
Well,
an
so you can
example.
also sort of see how, I think before I became a designer, I didn't realize, I thought it was kind of more like what you see in the movies, and I think was the idea that's prevalent in popular culture that creativity just strikes you, and
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know, I was an investment banker before I became a quilter or a designer, and got a master's degree in design. And the process of designing, at least for me, is about generating ideas, editing them, generating more ideas. It's not a linear process. It's not a magical process. It's a process of just working at it and polishing it and being willing to throw it away and start all over again. It's a very kind of brutal process in terms of it's hard.
It's work.
Some come easily, and some are really. This one in particular was just a lot of iterations to get it to work, both logistically and from a design perspective.
And the creativity and the creative process is really different for every person, and it can be different from one project to another. I think Weeks and I share, I think because we both have backgrounds, both have graduate design degrees, we share some understandings of how to work through ideas and communicate them.
It's
I think
patience.
it requires a lot of patience, and I think especially when you're working together, it requires pretty clear communication, because you can have an idea in your head, but I think sketching and words are both very important to communicate ideas.
Yeah, that there are a lot of decisions that we made that we'll talk about as we kind of show you some of our early sketches and iterations, and answer, I guess, give you a little bit of a peek into how this is so complex. I mean, it's a combination of, it has to be a great design. If it's a Quiltalong quilt, it has to be something where there's an opportunity for participants to learn something. Our feeling about Quiltalong quilts, whether they're mystery or non-mystery, is that it should be a quilt that many people would benefit from having us walk them through it. Rather
Right.
than, it should be a pattern.
It's not just a paint by numbers, do this, then this, then this.
Or other things that are in publications. You don't need us to give you a video. You don't need us to necessarily talk through design, your palettes or whatever. So the Quiltalong quilts, also the patterns are much longer because they need a lot of diagrams and such. So it has to have an educational component for you, but it also has to be unlike, we don't want to like knock ourselves off. We're certainly not knocking anybody else off, but we don't want it to, it would just make me crazy if somebody said, oh, it's just pretty much a variation of the New Day Quiltalong or something. That would bum me
Each
out.
Quiltalong we want to be a different experience for us, for you, and it's a balancing act of learning those new skills, learning new techniques or refining existing techniques, but also the customizable nature is really an interesting beast, because we want each of you to have the option of following exactly as we go, the same way we do things, or really take it and customize it to your color preferences, your size preferences.
Or even layout options.
And layout options. But in doing that, we have to think ahead also to make sure that you'll be successful with the amount of fabric you're using, with we need to look at kind of the stress points ahead of time and make sure we address those.
So when we're planning all of this, we're also trying to use different fabrics and not have the same palette over and over again. And so, that's kind of like, there's a checklist that's always in the back of our mind of things it has to do before we even think about what it looks like.
Right, and Nancy, I do want to address, and it has to be fun. I'm glad they're fun for you, because
exactly.
And
hello, everybody. We started talking, but
we just get it.
Piled in quickly.
But the idea of fun and engaging is really important, and sometimes we work on parallel tracks where we might be designing 2 or 3 potential quilts, and we might be working on 2 or 3 narratives. And sometimes the narrative informs a design and vice versa. And we tend to have a lot more ideas that are in development than you might expect at any given time.
But basically, we have a very collaborative design process that is, I think it's pretty unique, actually.
I think it is.
And so sometimes the concept or the narrative will start with me, or sometimes a general idea will start with Bill, or vice versa. And although I tend to do more of the narrative, I guess.
I think this one, I came up with the seed of the narrative, but then you totally brought it to life.
No, I think I came up with the rom-com thing.
I thought I did. Okay, well, this goes back to...
I said, well, what do you think? Is it, well, what do you think? And you jumped on it immediately and said, yes, done.
Because we have so many different narratives that are...
different projects in the works every time.
Anyway, so we will...
So I'm going to just answer a couple more questions.
Later on, just so you know, we're going to back up and walk you through a bit of kind of the sketching and illustration point of how we develop the final quilt. But
actually, do you want to just do that now?
Oh, okay. Well,
okay, we'll just do it now.
Do it now. So I'm just quickly looking at the feed. If you can look at that.
Yes, thank you so much for all of the... It's nice to see people all over the world. And thank you, Roseanne, for saying that you love what we do for you. We really do spend an enormous amount of time trying to get everything right. And when there's 3 people who look over everything, but because it is so complex, there's so many pages and variations and layouts and everything, we try to catch every little thing. But anyway, let's go back to the design process.
I'm going very low tech here again, because I rather than fancy screen sharing, I just have a few printouts. So going back to Matchmaker, so when we came up with this idea of the rom-com screenwriter, there was a narrative that needed to be developed, but at the same time, we needed to develop the quilt.
Let me just interject. With the narrative, part of the idea of that you were gonna, we decided that the blocks or the units were gonna be two fabrics and there were gonna be two values, and that kind of gave me the idea of the matchmaker, that you were matching the fabrics so they would be happy together.
Yeah, and one of the underlying ideas here was this was about pairing, and we've done a lot of very minimal quilts. This was going to be a maximalist quilt from the beginning. And with maximalism, you have a lot of forms, a lot of colors, and to pull it off successfully, you need something that unifies everything, so it's not just visual chaos. And in this case, it was that division into three values. And so we had two things going on at the very beginning. And so I just blew up a page from, this was a page from Weeks' sketchbook. We both have sketchbooks all the time. And you'll have, this is something that actually made it into the little branch-like forms. We also looked at some older quilts that we had done, and what we knew was in order for it to be maximal, a maximalist design, we wanted a variety of units that people could concentrate on. But then the question is, how do they get organized?
Wait a second, though, before you leave
Okay,
that.
you.
So this is, a lot of people refer to as the tree units.
Yes.
This is a variation of our glyphs pattern, different proportions, but it's a similar technique, and that was from like 10 years ago.
What issue is that? That was
9. So
Modern
like,
Quilts Illustrated number 9.
Yeah, it was like 10, 12 years ago. At any rate, you can see here I've just made notes of summer-winter variations. Summer-winter variations refers to you want to tell them like in weaving what that refers to?
Summer-winter weave is in weaving where you have a flat, this was usually done with carpets, but let's say you have a black carpet with white stripes. There's a way of weaving in such that when you flip it upside down, it's white with black stripes. So you have an inverse. And it's a long tradition and a technical way of doing weaving. And we both were talking a lot about summer-winter as a way to let people make multiples of a unit, but also see how different it is when you had a small proportion of light on dark or a small proportion of dark on light. So there'd be a lot of learning about value and color.
And there would be built-in contrast. So this, to me, this was like a really important, and this was, I don't know how many months ago, this is like last spring or something, we came up with this. So,
and we have so many other pages like this. But
yeah, but this was just a blown up version. And then there were other things like, we had a block that also used our magic inch technique that was similar to a quilt we had that we haven't given you a pattern of called Lace. But then we decided no, that we really wanted to do this more improvised shape instead. And then there were these other kind of these lantern sort of units that we decided against. And then instead of this variation of our tube socks block, we changed it.
We auditioned lots of forms. So basically, we started looking at these
This is always
units.
where it starts, with the sketchbook.
But then, at the same time, we had many kind of blocks. This is kind of like color blocking, where each of these would represent roughly a napping quilt.
But hold on. So this is I did this idea of some variation of our tube socks, and then that becomes this.
Oh, but this was also, you can see the variation with the current quilt where you had the evening or the daytime.
Right.
But what we started looking at, knowing it was going to be a maximalist design, we wanted there to be a very clear gesture that would be columns and rows or a symmetrical form, something that from a distance unified all of the color and shape. Now, none of these ended up being exactly what we did, and we had dozens of variations. Now, I'm kind of laughing right now because one of the challenges when we do this is I tend to use really garish and sometimes ugly colors.
Yeah.
It drives her crazy.
Yeah, because I'm like, why not just make the colors prettier to begin with?
But to me, it helps me differentiate and see the chunks. Like, I never had any intention of doing a cyan, magenta, and olive quilt.
Right.
Those colors help me just understand the scale and proportion of a gesture.
But the other thing that I think is something that we have to think about, because we're working only online, that we didn't have to think about when we were traveling with 100 pounds of quilts, from guild to guild around the country and to, big quilt shows, is we have to design something that will read on screen, and that when it's the whole quilt is shrunk down to an 8.5 by 11 printout, you get the idea, because the subtlety that you could get with seeing something in a gallery in full, that's 7 feet long or whatever, isn't the same
different
as what especially with color, that color subtleties, when you take a 6.5 foot long quilt and you shrink it down even to an 8.5 by 11
onto
piece
your
of
phone.
paper or onto a phone, it has to read. And so that you have to have some big design gesture, because you can't be kind of too soft spoken.
Right, but at the same time, you're not just designing for the screen. I mean, in quilts,
it's one of the checklist things.
It's a checklist thing.
It has to look good on screen.
It's kind of like when you walk into a room, you want to understand what the quilt is on that bed or on a wall, and you often see that from quite a distance. So but the screen is a reality. So basically, we had sketches of units. We had layouts of how these units could go together. Then we started developing like page after page after page of different units.
And you can see this is what some people are referring to, the early iterations of the French fry blocks.
Which ended up being quite different. When I look at this page, absolutely none of these made it into the quilt. But we were looking at kind of the rhythm, could that connect to something else? It started to look like a March Madness bracket. Like, no, can't do that. And
we hadn't even really put the value component into it yet.
And here, there's none of the summer, winter, but that was already in the back of our minds. We kind of have these parallel tracks. Then I discovered the first full layout of what I'm so glad wasn't the final quilt.
Yeah.
But this was a very rough, early idea, and you can begin to see what's going on here. It changed in so many ways. I think the trees are the only thing that we kept.
So here's, and I think it's maybe worth talking about why we made certain design decisions. So I had originally thought I would like these units and these units in this quilt. And then when I saw the trees were so fine in terms of the texture within the quilt. And designers often use the term vocabulary to talk about the way one design decision informs or affects other design decisions. And it was getting these were still toward the end. And I said, I think it's the wrong vocabulary, because these are so fine and delicate, and these are so chunky.
A little coarse.
Yeah, so we decided to break this down into the friendship block that would be a little bit finer with some smaller pieces and a kind of a little less chunky.
And we knew that we wanted to incorporate improvisation, but we also knew that it couldn't be 100% improvisational. Like those of you who did this know the apple blocks were the one block that had no improvisation. They were all the exact same size, the exact same angle. Originally, we were working with this block in the center instead of the apple block. But I'm going to back up to tell you why we reject this. There are a couple reasons. One, the points were so fine that it was really unpleasant to sew.
Yeah.
The points could go down into your bobbin area if your needle wasn't sharp enough. They were very hard to line up. But also, as I back up even more, the kind of light center and the darker edges didn't feel like they were totally in balance. It was kind of like...
It wasn't clear enough.
It wasn't clear enough. And then I started to see like a jack-o'-lantern with fangs.
Yeah.
And there were lots of things, but I think the main thing was we realized the importance of the gesture here, of the light band. And with the big chunks and with these, that band was not nearly as crisp as it could have been. Even the French fry blocks at the top, originally we were going to have this horizontal element running through them, but it added one more level of alignment that was actually, I think it looks really cool, but it could be a very frustrating experience for quilters who are trying to make sure edges lined up at the top and the bottom to also have that in the middle. Just took some of the fun away.
So anyway, so that's sort of like the design thing.
I'll kind of put a cap on that, but that just when you get an idea of how much goes into it.
Yeah. So then there was another question on our Facebook group about who quilts our quilts. And we quilt our quilts.
She quilted this one.
Yes, I quilted this one. There was a lot of, it was highly stressful because, I didn't want to mess it up, and I was doing a lot of quilting that I haven't done before, and, it was kind of a high stakes thing.
It's interesting, when we're piecing, we go back and forth. Whoever sits down will piece. We're very interchangeable that way. However, with the quilting, whoever starts it generally does the entire thing. With a couple exceptions. Yeah. There are certain stitches, like I love pebbling. She says, great, you do that. Kind of freehand doodle quilting, not my thing. She's 10 times better at it. So there are some quilts that might have a couple of different patterns and we'll take turns. But usually, like in the case of this one, you did it 100%.
Yeah, well, and also, you weren't feeling great at the time, so it wasn't a good. You weren't at your best to do it either.
It would not have looked very good.
No, and so there was also a question about, do we design the units first and then the overall quilt, or vice versa? And I think most of the time, it's. Well, I guess there isn't really a most of the time. I would say in general, there's a big gesture that we work toward. In this particular case, we were kind of scratching around to try to figure out a combination of things. It was because this wasn't just one big gesture. It had to be a lot of small gestures too. So we were kind of trying to kind of coordinate a series of units and then figure out how they all went together. But most of the time...
The big gesture was the most important one with this. Especially
but we didn't have that until later.
We didn't have it until later, but it helped us also refine proportion, because if you want the center band to read as dark, the little gestures couldn't be 50% light, 50% dark, or 50% medium.
And we knew we wanted rectangles.
And
we were kind of adamant about the rectangles.
Here's one other thing. It's a tiny detail. But if you look at the original blocks, I don't know if you can tell online, but these weren't squares. And these were a little taller and more narrow. And it really wasn't until it was halfway designed that we're like, whoa, why aren't these squares? That will make all the math so much easier. And then it allowed people, if you look at the difference between the lap layout and the napping layout, those branches are turned 90 degrees. A couple people have already shared online their flimsies, and some people have rotated the walk with Jane 90 degrees. That, I was kind of excited to allow more possibility for you all to customize things that way.
So I want to look at show a couple of details about the quilting, because it's, you know, when we're sharing the overall photo, it's really hard to see all of the little
and you can see it in the videos for those of you who are participating and have access to the videos.
Yeah.
But if you don't, this might be the first time you see it up close.
Okay, so you can see that.
Do you want me to hold
yes,
this?
that would be great. The little these blocks. I did a very small stipple on the background and left the French fries unquilted. And I typically don't like to leave things unquilted if they're wider than a half an inch, because I think they look a little bit messy. But what I like about this strategy is that it gives them a little bit more depth.
But
To flatten the
interestingly,
background so they just pop up a little bit more.
but at first glance, they almost look quilted just because the
crinkling.
crinkling of the washing and drying mimics the stipple density very nicely.
So if you are thinking about doing this, this kind of stitch, I'll get it a little closer. What you want to do is, if you're stippling it, just get as close to that edge as you can, because that will reinforce the shape better.
Okay, good point. Someone said, yeah, much more visible on screen on the dark background.
Yes, it is. Exactly.
Thanks for mentioning
that. But you can see in all of these that I tried over and over again to get all the way to the edge. So it would really, it distorts it a little bit if you don't get near the edge. We're not stitch in the ditch people. If you like to do that, feel free. But I would rather achieve the kind of neatness of the quilting with the piecing by incorporating, like moving the stitching to the edge of where it needs to be rather than putting a straight line there.
And
okay.
So, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the one thing that we showed in the video, and I'm just curious because the lighting is a little bit different tonight. No, I love the quilting on the sashing that Weeks did.
Let me just back up for anybody who's not part of the Quiltalong and hasn't seen it. But this is 100% free motion, no rulers. It's intentional. We're not ruler quilting people. We kind of like the idea that it looks like it was done by hand. It's kind of the difference between, I think of it as the difference between handwriting and a computerized font, that I like the handwriting look of it. So it would be very, very different looking if we had used rulers and made everything very
or
hardlined or programmed something.
Which
But
you
this
could
is all-
absolutely do.
You could.
It's a different art form.
Yeah.
Both of those are different art forms. I mean, there is just insanely well-controlled ruler work out there where
Yeah.
people have perfected it. And it's just different. That's not what we do.
It's a different vocabulary.
It is a different vocabulary. And I think part of this is also, there was this improvisational nature to the units where every unit was unique. So it seemed to be in keeping to have a certain looseness, yet a certain regularity to the quilting. It goes
you
back
wanted
to
it like
vocab.
regular, but not,
As we say, regularly irregular.
or regular, but neat, you
But
know,
neat, yeah.
enough. Yeah. Okay, so then on the sashing, between the first and second row, we use the dark blue.
Which you cannot see
step.
here.
Yeah, but you can probably see the stitching on the back more easily.
It's those circles. And again, they're regularly irregular. They're,
Way
you know,
down here, this whole,
Yeah, that whole band.
And go ahead.
I think that the fact that Weeks measured out and just put a little hash mark.
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't have an exact circle she was drawing, but she had a general distance. And so when you're doing this for the first time, the first few circles you do, you're going to feel like, ugh, that's not the same. Ah, that's a little off. You do 20 of them, and there's an amazing similarity. Then you do a couple rows, and they really look unified. So,
but I was doing a series of arcs because I didn't want the heaviness of going all the way around 1.5 times and then going around. It seemed like it would be a little too heavy. So I liked, this is the first time I've ever done this stitch, those little circles, and I was really happy with it. I think it just required a little measuring and putting some, to figure out where I was going. And if you're not comfortable with your quilting and you are intimidated about quilting, I think I mentioned it in the video, there's 2 things to getting better at machine quilting, whether it's on a domestic machine or a long arm. Practice replaces any video, any class, anything. Practice, but also knowing where you're going. And so because I had those little chalk marks, I knew where that little curve,
you're always
arc
looking
was going.
a couple steps ahead.
Yeah, you have to, because it's so fast.
Yeah. And so
yes, Darcy, it does look like, the reason that these look like they're appliqué is because I quilted all the way to the edge, which gives them almost like a little trapunto.
Almost like a trapunto.
Yeah. So
now,
that's another.
I thought I'd do one other thing really quickly. Can I just want to hold up more of this? Ooh, there we go, just so you can see. One of the other things that I was hoping people would get out of this was that when you saw everyone's palettes, some people used the Matchmaker bundle we sold, others put palettes together, and you would see there was just a huge range of hues in many of them. And I know some people were nervous about how is this all going to go together, because many quilts are kind of color coordinated and collections are color coordinated. And that big gesture with the dark and light values was so strong that we knew it was going to unify a multitude of palettes. And there are also the monochromatic examples that people have posted that are just
the brown
stunning.
and tan one. Yeah.
Just beautiful as well. And this goes back to the design, is we wanted to design something that we knew would work with a huge range of people's tastes, their stashes, and we're seeing that now.
And we also, I'm always kind of, it kind of takes my breath away sometimes how strongly people feel about color.
Oh.
On social media, one day I posted, I think 4 or 5 brown quilts, and I got a lot of brown hate. No, thank you. I don't like that. Not my style. Then it's like, whoa, because there are no colors we don't use. Yeah. It's only bad color combinations. So I always feel a little bit more comfortable using a multicolored palette, because there are people who were like, absolutely no purple, absolutely no orange, absolutely no brown, and pastels. Oh my gosh.
Pastels
we had people who and the thing is that these, in theory, these are pastels, but when you're using them this way, they don't look like pastels, they just look luminous. And
we always
brown. Did you see people, Claire? People did freak out on the brown. And so I was just kind of like, yikes, and we had already put the brown in this bundle, and I'm like, oh.
I love the brown there. And
me too.
But we always say it's about the role of the color, not the color itself. And I think back to a project we did years ago where it was a 2-color quilt that we were doing workshops with. and we bought dozens of bolts of fabric of a color I didn't like. I love the quilt. I love the roll of that color. But I remember spending so much money thinking, I just spent $1,000 on a color I don't like. I loved it in the quilt because of the roll of the color.
Well, and also we did 27 quilts for 27 queen and king size quilts in a whole bunch of ochre-y, poopy sort of colors.
For a commission.
Yeah, that neither of us liked initially, and then by the end we actually really did like. But anyway, we digress. Okay, let's go back to...
I'm still picking threads. I'm still picking threads
Well, you will endlessly be picking threads.
So...
Okay, so then let's talk about the Janes, the walk around the lake.
Walk with Jane, yes.
If you look at this block, look at the quilting, and you can see that if you're doing spirals, the most important thing is figuring out where you're going to turn around. You want to, if you want this width between lines of stitching, you have to go double all the way around because you need to be able to turn around in the middle and get back out. So,
and this goes back to strategy. That you have to be
know where you're
looking
going.
ahead and kind of pinpoint where you're going to turn. And it's true, sometimes, every now and then, your mind wanders, you're like, oops.
I know.
And you have this narrow channel you've got to go through. And I think...
Sandra says it's so much fun listening to the two of us. She needs to tell our daughter.
But as I think you can tell, like, we really enjoy the development of this. And
this is months.
It's months, but also... We're talking about the quilting now, but I'm really, like, I've loved seeing the flimsies come together, the units, the blocks. The quilting is going to be really interesting to see as well because, we said this is a maximalist quilt, but the quilting could be either quite simple because I think the piecing can hold its own. I mean, you can have very simple quilting, or I'm sure there are people who are going to take it to levels of complexity that we haven't even considered.
Well, speaking of which, boy, there's friendship blocks. Look at the sizes that we recommended. Some of you had like 35, 40 little eensy pieces.
They were so cool.
Yeah, and the thing is,
they weren't writing the. They didn't.
They didn't have a deadline.
But I do like that variation, and I was.
But I think it's also when you have the scraps, it's intoxicating to use them.
It's really, you feel good about using scraps.
Yeah.
And I think that the friendship blocks were, I'm going to back up a bit. We talked earlier about the design of the quilt. Then there's the design of the Quiltalong. Once we have it designed, we break up all the units from week to week so that we're kind of alternating something that's fun and mindless, something that's a lot more detail oriented, something that's improvisational, something that's structured, and yet trying not to reveal too much at any one time.
But we're also trying to divide up the work.
Yes.
So it isn't like you're not done at, Friday at 2:15, and then the other one takes you 3 weeks to do. And
I'm glad a couple people have already mentioned in the comments that they enjoyed having a little more time.
And we're gonna we had to.
I'm sorry. It was a difficult time for me, but the timing I thought worked out really nicely. But again, either on the Facebook page or in comments here, we would always like to know your thoughts about the timing, the pacing of it.
So Jan's asking if we quilted it on a domestic machine or a long arm. We have done that spiral technique on a domestic machine, and so I know I can answer your questions about that. We did it on a long arm because we do so many quilts that we've had a long arm for 26 years now.
And we do use it very much like a free motion domestic machine in that this entire quilt Weeks did free motion stitch regulator turned off. I know there are a lot of people that love a stitch regulator, which makes your, for those who don't know how that works, it keeps your stitch length the same regardless of where you go, what speed you quilt.
My stitching is
But it doesn't,
pretty regular.
it's
so
fairly regular. It doesn't totally matter though.
Yeah, I don't really
it's
care.
not going to fall apart. And
if anything, it's just a little harder to rip out, like toward the end.
if you
it
get
gets
too
small.
tight. Now, I think one of those of you who may have quilted with a stitch regulator, it's a very different experience on a long arm machine, because if you move the machine quickly, it sews quickly. If you move slowly, it sews slowly. So I personally don't like a stitch regulator for two reasons.
Yeah.
One, it's not fast. I think both of us quilt pretty quickly, and the stitch regulator doesn't always keep up the way I would like, but also it changes the momentum of the machine.
I find it like having a
noise.
straitjacket on. But
Yeah.
back to Jan's question of, if you're doing the spirals on a domestic machine, I drop my feed dogs and I'm just moving that little section of the quilt around. And, you know, it's not, you're just kind of shifting the whole thing at most, 7 inches or so. But it's very manageable unless you're doing like a queen size or a king size
Yeah,
quilt.
I mean, you do have to prepare the quilt and roll it tightly on
Yeah.
a domestic machine. But when we do the spirals, if we're using a domestic machine, if you have the walk with Jane, whoops, and there we go, walk with Jane, that's only, it's what, roughly 3.5, I'm all crooked.
Yeah, I know.
3.5 by 7 inches. So
You're not moving
you're
it that
not
much.
moving it that much. The friendship block is twice the size because
Yeah.
it's a square, but even that is a decent constraint. And when we did this quilt on the long arm, we actually chose quilting patterns for the units that we knew could also be done successfully
Exactly.
on a domestic machine. Without a doubt, there's more preparation. I mean, it's more cumbersome, but it is all doable.
But it's also one of the reasons that we like this napping size. I think it's more functional for most people, that most people don't need, 25. Like, it's a lot easier to find uses for 25 napping quilts. If everybody's sitting around watching a movie or whatever,
Yeah.
you can throw 5 quilts around the room. Whereas if it's a queen size quilt, it can be, it's big, and it's expensive and it's harder to quilt. And this napping size, I think, is really manageable for people on a domestic machine. But the other thing to consider is your batting, because if you're using polyester batting that has a higher loft,
Or wool, or a heavyweight cotton.
it's harder to roll that under the throat of the machine, and it's harder to move.
And
I
it's
use the
physically
little-
tiring. I mean,
I use the little finger cots to move around when I'm either binding or doing machine quilting. I don't need the whole hands. The whole gloves make my hand
I
feel
don't use
clammy.
either, but
He's got bigger hands than I do, so he doesn't need to. But it's
they
definitely
they do work well for pushing and
yeah.
pulling.
So
But I think
yeah.
that's a good point. The thin cotton batting
or the bamboo.
or the bamboo, it rolls so tightly that you can compress it and concentrate on the area you're quilting on a domestic machine quite
Yeah,
nicely.
Jen, it does help to drop the feed dogs, because it's a similar to a long arm in that when the feed dogs are dropped, the speed at which you're moving the quilt around will determine your stitch length.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what we did before we started. We had our own long arm. Yeah, but okay.
Great.
Are we finding the digital prints fabric for backing is problematic for quilting? So I think we've had, of all of our lines ever, we've only had one line that was digitally printed. All of the rest of our fabric lines are screen printed. And I do know that a lot of people who have used digitally printed fabrics or cheaper fabrics, because sometimes it's cheaper fabrics too, they get what I think of as runs. In the when the needle goes in, you get like a long white, it's almost like a little, I don't know how to, a little white line that develops where the needle goes through the fabric. And so, I mean, I think two things, Mary, if you're asking about digitally printed fabrics. One, we're not using them, but I have seen problems with it, other than the lines a couple of lines that we've designed. But that's something to tell the quilting manufacturer, because, and I don't think I'm talking out of school here, but the people who run fabric companies are not quilters typically. Yeah. And even the people in the top management are usually not quilters, and they really need to know when there's a performance issue with their fabrics. And
but I'm gonna jump in though,
yeah,
because I don't totally agree with this. I think if you have digitally printed fabrics that are 5 years or older, 5 years old or older, there were a lot more problems. The technology has really, really changed, and the low-end digitally printed fabrics are still sometimes problematic, but higher-end kind of independent quilting shop digitally printed fabrics these days are actually great quality. If it's, I'm gonna say 90% of the time, the inks that are used for the printing are very, very different than they were 5 years ago. I'm an advocate in many ways of, like, I don't want to badmouth digital printing because it's still evolving quickly. It's environmentally so much better than screen printing. It uses, a fraction of the amount of water and resources. But I do think it was a steep learning curve.
And I don't think it's uniform. I think it really varies.
But same with screen prints. They really vary in quality.
Yeah, but I think there was a period, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, although some of you enjoy it when we go into the weeds, but Pakistan had attracted a lot of venture capital money to set up new digital printing factories and such, and some of that has been good and some of that has not been so good, and some of the base cotton that they've used is not good quality, and some of it is good quality. So there's so many hands that go into the fabrics you buy, and it's really hard to know until you put that first needle through it whether you're going to have a problem.
But I will agree with the comment I see. Change your needle frequently. Yeah. When you're working with digital prints, a sharp needle and a slightly thinner needle is not going to pull those individual fibers. One of the tricks though is if you're doing free motion quilting, you really don't want the thinnest needle because it'll have more flex and there's a higher likelihood that it could break. If you've ever looked at a long arm, the needle on a long arm is crazy thick. I mean, it's thicker than a jeans needle. And the reason is the machine is moving, and if the needle flexes too much...
Anne's very happy that you're going
I'm in the weeds, Anne. I'm always in the weeds. But if you compare the needle of a long arm to the needle of a domestic machine, they're very, very different. So it's a trade-off. I think changing your needle on a domestic machine, frequently people don't change their needles enough. They just don't.
Or their rotary blades.
Oh, I can be guilty of that too.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So anyway.
And then I'm also just going to say though that I see there's there's, I think it's really important to correct misinformation that's out there, and there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
And one area of digital fabric, there's a couple of things that I would like to sort of give you accurate information about that, and then spread, correct it when you see it, because I see a lot of people in large general quilting groups who say things like, all these fabric companies are trying to rip us off, and they're making all this money by doing this cheap digital printing, and they're just trying to take advantage of us. And I usually jump in to say, FYI, digital printing is typically more expensive than screen printing, and the reason that quilt fabric manufacturers do it, and that designers like us sometimes agree to it and are okay with it, is that we have to decide how many colors we're going to use and how big our repeat sizes are. And if you're doing screen printing, like, the fabric manufacturers need the fabric to sell, and they want it to perform well. And if they think that having a bigger repeat, having more colors, having a different size is going to yield more attractive fabric for you, they're willing to pay extra for digital printing. But they are not doing it because it's cheaper, it's more expensive. So they're doing it because they're trying to make you happy and to have fabric that you're attracted to.
And it actually reduces some steps. You don't have as much back and forth testing out the color or creating the screen. So it can be faster to get it into print digitally. So
and you can do smaller print runs.
It's a trade-off. Again, 5-10 years ago.
Are we in the weeds still enough for you?
5-10 years ago, the digital prints weren't as color fast. They're great now. I mean, the high quality ones, we haven't had any bleeding or fading. But there are a lot of things to decide when you're designing fabric, where it's going to get printed. It really depends on the design.
But I can say this kind of categorically, it has been, since COVID, it has been a brutal operating environment for fabric manufacturers because of changes in supply chain issues and shipping channels and terrorism that changed the shipping routes, and now the tariffs. So be nice to the fabric manufacturers, because they're really, it's been a really challenging environment, and they're not trying to take advantage of anybody.
No,
they're just trying to
survive.
Yeah, and have a great product. And they're trying to use the technique that will give them the best product. So anyway, okay, a couple more things. So
there's more.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the friendship blocks are similar, except it's a square spiral. And you can see in that red one here, you can see where I turned around in the middle to get myself back out to go on to the next one. Okay, and then you want to talk about the apple blocks?
Oh, well, again, those of you who have done the Quiltalong, there's a lot in the video, so I don't think I want to repeat that all. However, I will say one thing. We discussed that we used one color on all of the one thread color on the darks, a different one on the lights, and a third one in the sashing.
Actually, let's go this way so they can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some people might want to change and have more thread colors.
So let's just repeat. So we had one fabric or one thread color here, which was kind of a khaki, and then beige.
Light tan.
Yeah. And then we had a darker tan here, and then we had a navy blue thread that matched the background fabric.
and we had talked about further differentiating areas with thread color, but we ultimately thought like there's enough going on.
Yeah.
And sometimes you could add 50% more detail but not see it because there's so much
Right.
going on, and that's just kind of not a great use of time. I like the decision in the
Yeah,
end with,
I'm happy with
with
it.
what we've done. I'm quite happy with it. So,
Okay,
so
so
anyway,
there were-
keep those of you who are doing this, keep posting your progress. You don't always have to wait. I know it can feel like pressure. Someone puts up their completed flimsy and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm behind. No, take your time. And you can post different layouts, just share things.
Yeah, enjoy the process and don't shortchange yourself.
You're
There's
gonna-
there's no prize for
And you're
finishing
going to
early.
inspire other people.
Absolutely. So another question we had were long arm recommendations for beginners. We're fans of partially because we how can I put this? When you're making your living as a modern quilter, you save up. And so we've bought 2 long arms in our
In
26 years. Both of them were used and factory refurbished by Gamble. And by having either factory refurbished parts, and maybe there's like a little bit of a sticker somebody put on the side of their Gamble, or there's a little paint that's chipped on one of the rollers, whatever, you can save like $10,000.
Well,
I mean,
also,
it's an enormous savings.
It depends on what you're going to do with it. I think the first Gamble that we had for many, many years was actually owned by a company that did quilted fabric for the military for tents.
I don't think they were quilted. I think they were just sewn.
Oh, I think it was well.
Okay.
But it wasn't even used for quilting. It was as basic as they
Yeah.
come, and
But it worked for us for
it
15
worked for
years,
us
like 10 years.
10
I guess.
years, and it was also especially cheap because it was the biggest. It was like this extra long. It was
Yeah.
ridiculous. If we happened to have a space where it fit, but
Yeah.
most people would not have wanted a 15-foot long machine. And then the second one, the one we have now, is like it was not the top of the line at all.
No.
And I
But
don't
it was
think,
also factory refurbished.
yeah, I don't think we'll ever need, I hope, another. In terms of recommending machines, whether it's a domestic machine or a long arm, I think one of the first things you have to think about is where can you have it serviced? Like, let's say you fall in love with a Gamble, but there's no one who can service it near you, but there's an Innova dealer or something. There are lots of great machines. I think you've got to figure out what feels good to you, but you've got to be able to get it serviced. Like, I do all the service of our long arm, but I don't touch.
There's nobody near us.
Well, compared to many people, but
yeah.
I don't even know actually because.
Well,
here's
here's what we know, is that unlike a domestic machine, I thought, a little, so naive. I thought you turn it on, you start quilting.
Oh no.
Well, no, I know, but it's like you don't really know. Like the first couple weeks we had our first Gamble, it took me 2 weeks to get the tension right. And that was just because there's a learning curve. And so, think about, is there somebody to service it, but if you want somebody to help you, like teach you how to use it, someplace that has classes would be helpful. We had no instruction. So, but I know that there are people who...
And we actually use ours a little differently in certain respects. And when we had this one set up, I had a list of questions, and the company that set it up, who are real experts, just kind of looked at us like, what?
They
like
only
that's-
use the, what is that, with the little laser thing, what is that called?
Oh, the old pantographs, where you
Pantographs.
trace things, or they
Yeah,
use the
the
Statler Stitcher.
Yeah, they didn't
different way.
do free motion.
But also, so I think there's a great community online if you're interested in learning. They're very, very helpful people, but it's not quick and easy by any means, and it is a big commitment.
It's a big commitment for space. It's a big commitment for learning, and it's a big commitment for you're going to have to become more mechanical than you might think you would, than you've ever had to be for your domestic machine. So but having said that, Bill is particularly, when it was time to get a new long arm, Bill is particularly sensitive.
Picky.
I was trying to be diplomatic.
You don't need to be.
Sounds, and he did not like the sound of the Innova, right?
I loved it on paper. I loved it on
Yes.
paper. I liked using it.